In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the rear coil springs on this Toyota 4runner. I always recommend replacing them in pairs, so let's get started. You don't have to take the wheels off for this repair. You can if you want to. I'm not going to because the first bolt that we're after is this one right here, and there's plenty of clearance. Also, I want to mention that you should support the rear differential with something. I have a pull jack since I'm on a lift, but if you're on the ground, you can just use a floor jack. Use a 17mm socket. Remove the lower bolt of the shock once you've supported the rear differential. Take that out. Take this washer off. Sometimes it gets stuck. Next, we're going to pry the shock absorber off. It's going to slide off of this bushing here, or the bushing will slide off the sleeve, just like that. You can set it aside. At this point, I will add a second pull jack on the other side of the vehicle so I can disconnect the other side shock, so I can hopefully lower this differential enough. Just put minimal pressure on it. And now, take off this 17mm bolt, as well as this washer. Pop the shock off with the pry bar. Try not to damage the housing of the shock, of course. Leave that like that. I need to loosen up the bushing on the differential side of these upper arms so it can pivot. It's not dropping down low enough for me to remove the springs safely. So put a 17mm socket on the nut side and a 17 wrench on the bolt to hold it. Break them free. Okay, take this off. The bolt moves, which is important. Otherwise it would mean that it's seized in there. I'm actually going to put the nut back on a couple threads because I don't want to remove these bolts or the arms. I just wanted to loosen them up so it can pivot. Now we have to do the same thing to the other side. Like I said, let's do the same to the other side. Same size tools. Okay. Get the nut started on this bolt just so it can stay on there. Okay. We also have to loosen up these lower two bolts for the bushings on these trailing arms because of the same reason. I need it to swing down, and right now they're tight, so it's not letting it. For this bottom bolt, use a wrench, 19mm wrench on the nut side, and then use a socket on the bolt side. Break it free. I'm gonna use the wrench, a longer wrench, to break the nut free first. As you can see, that bolt is pretty stuck in there. And a lot of times you're fighting the tension of the bolt at the same time if you try to loosen it up like that. Okay. That just broke free. Okay, now let's go back to the air impact. Okay, that's all I want to do. Like I said, not removing anything, just want these loose. Let's do the same to the other side, same size sockets, of course. All right, this side came off a little easier. Now let's finish loosening this up a little. That's it. Leave it like that. Let's loosen up the bolt that holds this track bar onto the frame, or you could do it off the differential, whatever's easiest for you. 17mm socket and wrench. That's loose enough. Now lower your support. Try to lower it evenly if you're using two different ones. Okay, great. I believe that we have the rear differential loose enough now to pry it down and pop the spring out. However, I want to remove this ABS wire, that is if you have ABS of course, off of this clip so that we don't potentially damage it in the process. If you pinch this clip on each side, you should be able to easily pop it out. I'm going to tuck it underneath this bracket. Now it's mostly clear of the spring. You can lower your support. As you can see, the differential is not going to come down all the way. Obviously, it's still bolted up. But you can pry down on the differential, up on the spring, maybe use a pry bar of some sort, and lift the spring and pop it out. There's no pressure on the spring anymore. It's not holding the weight of the vehicle, so it's not going to go flying anywhere. Okay, comes down with the bump stop, which we'll have to save to put on the new spring, but here's the old spring. Take the new spring, they're both the same, so it doesn't matter which one you choose first. Put the rubber bump stop in here. At the top, you'll notice an outline where the old spring sat. Line it up the best you can, doesn't have to be perfect, and then slide it back in right where it came from. Make sure that's seated at the top, which it is. Push the spring up, pull the axle down. Again, there shouldn't be a lot of pressure on this. You can tap it in the rest of the way. There we go, that's just seated. Don't forget to reconnect or resecure the ABS wire on this bracket if you took it off. Now let's do the same to the other side. There's no ABS wire here. Well, there is, but it's low enough to where you can clear it easily. So do the same thing. We're going to pry down on the differential. Maybe use a pry bar for the spring and pop it right up and out. On this side, as you can see, the bump stop stayed up there. If it wants to stay up there, just leave it. It'll be just fine. There's the old spring. Let's get the new one installed. Since this one stayed up here, I'm going to try to line up the spring with the cutout on the bump stop as it goes up. Just like that. Now I'll grab that pry bar and pry the bottom of the spring up into place. Just walk it over, perfectly seated. There you have it. As we put this rear end back together and tighten up all the bolts, keep in mind that as we loosen this up, things might have shifted. So if you think you need an alignment, even though there is no adjustment here, just loosening up these bolts could shift the rear end. So again, if you think you need an alignment, get one. Now we're ready to tighten this up. I want to raise the rear end at right height because these bushings need to sit where they would if the vehicle was on the ground with the weight of it on the suspension. So I'm going to go up a few inches, just estimate right height here. Make sure you're not pinching your shocks. I haven't reconnected them yet. Try to make it even on both sides. Okay, right about there. I'd say it's even and it's approximately at right height. Doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be close. That way the bushings don't wear prematurely. I'm going to start tightening these arms right where I left off at the end. So I'm going to start with the track bar bolt. Tighten it up. Make sure that's nice and snug. I couldn't find any specific torque specs for these, so that's why I'm just making them nice and tight. Let's tighten up the top bolts for these trailing arm bushings. 17mm socket and wrench. Nice and snug. Let's do the other side top trailing arm. Same size socket and wrench. Tighten it up. Perfect. Now for the bottom, 19mm socket and wrench. Tighten these up. Yeah, that's tight. Go to the other side, do the same thing. Perfect. This is optional, but I recommend and prefer to do this. Take this inner bushing off. Clean this area, put a light layer of silicone paste on here, and just work it around this whole shaft. Put the bushing back on. This will prevent rust from building up here. And now lower the axle support that you were using until it lines up perfectly. Slide the rest of the shock on. And now let's put the washer on with the bolt. Tighten it up. Let's torque it. 47 foot-pounds is the torque for this bolt. It's important that you don't over-tighten it, otherwise these bushings will get crushed and they will wear prematurely. There you go. Let's do the same to the other side. Let's do the same to the other side. Get this off. As you can see, some rust is already building up. This will make sure that it stops. Slide this over. Raise your axle or lower it, whatever you have to do to get this to line up. Okay, if this bushing pops out, make sure you seat it back in there. Let's grab the washer and the bolt. Start this back in, snug it up, and torque it to 47 foot-pounds as well. There you go. Now you can lower your support.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.